Hello, welcome to another episode of the DM Lounge. The big. First time back. Jesus. So this is a place where we delve deep into the dark, dangerous depths of the DM mind. As always, on my cyber sofa, I have a group of excellent know-it-alls and Liam, where we all discuss what it takes to create a good story in the world of Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop game. As I've said, one of our guests, that's the word, yeah. So with us today, we do have a very special guest, which is Scriv the Bard.
Hello.
Hey. Fan of the channel and an absolute amazing person. If you ever get a chance to chat to her, I'm sure she'll talk your ear off. It's brilliant.
That's a promise and a threat. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Lovely to have you. And my usual twosome I've got here is I have Mr. Liam Wright, our standard dungeon master, and the ever beautiful Emma. Just before going, Scriv, is there? Do you want to tell some people where they can find you and what you've been up to?
Yeah, so you can find me and my TTRPG mad ramblings on Twitter at Scriv the Bard. Also do some part-time streaming over on Twitch Tuesdays and Thursdays. We've got our Heroes of Iastera campaign session going this Thursday every other week. Or that may or may not actually be relevant by the time this comes out, so ignore that. Learn on Twitch. You'll catch on.
What time roughly?
Go see it. We've got a Discord channel as well.
What time roughly would we catch it?
So usually about 8 p.m., between 7:30 and 8 p.m., usually 8 p.m. UK time. 7 p.m. GMT. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. And then for the Heroes of Iastera campaign session, that goes a little bit later. We normally start about 11 p.m. BST because we've got some folks in North America as well. So now being in the central time zone, I definitely need that coffee and energy drink Friday morning after a campaign session, but it's so much fun and I'm never stopping.
Yeah.
Also a promise and a threat. But yeah, aside from that, check out Bard Commune as well. We recently had Bard Commune, a community project, go live, so you can follow us there for updates on Twitter too.
Awesome.
I'm gonna stop.
Well, please don't. I mean, so we're glad to have someone who has got so much going on. It's lovely to have you here.
Oh, don't remind me. There's a lot.
So, going into today's episode, the question that we are being posed today is, how does your world, when you're creating a world, how does the culture affect the player's game? How do you create it? In the sense of, is it a very religious place? Are they many religious factions? Is it very scientific? Very is it strong in government or like warring nations? How do you create your world in the sense of culture and things going on? With that starting, let's go to our resident dungeon master.
So for Ravis, it was a bit of a higgledy-piggledy, if I'm honest. I try, obviously, when I'm creating my world, I tell my story, and I've decided what my story is. And then from that story, I try to imagine what culture would evolve from that. So obviously, in the story of Ravis, it was this wild and cruel world. And then these 10 gods turned up, and at first they weren't gods. They were just very, very powerful beings. And through the safety of being near them, people built their homes around where they were staying, and these cities started to form. I sort of then try and work about how I think people in our cultures act. And one thing you do see fairly prevalently throughout all cultures is religion in some form or another. So I decided that was the way this was going to go, and it was going to birth into religion. It's difficult then, because I then just like to run with my story and decide, as we've now in Ravis, it's more how it is in some of the more atheist countries in the now times, where no miracles have been seen for 3,000 years, no gods have walked the land, monsters have been gone and disappeared. So it still affects everything. People still curse in those ways. People still bless things in those ways. You might still say a prayer when somebody dies, but the belief isn't there to the same level. And we're starting to move almost, I'd say Ravis right now is in like a cultural transition from moving from a religious mass to a more scientific. But
So-
where to start? That's a hard one. Start with your story, I'd say.
So, and how would you say that kind of affects, say, the players as they're kind of going along?
I mean, for clerics, that's the biggest deal usually. Obviously, if we're very scientific, that affects what items are available, what skill checks you're even doing. If you're really high tech, you're going to be doing your pick locks checks might be pulling off the front of the cables and attaching the power cable to the right wire. If it's low tech, it's a pick and a lock pick. Obviously, in Ravis, you guys have guns. There's airships. The modes of travel is a massive thing that is affected by the technological level of a civilization. So just far what we're seeing in Ravis is the travel is the big one.
Yeah.
Right.
That sounds cool.
And if anyone wants to see those airships, just come and watch us. Like, sounds good.
Yeah.
It'll be somewhere down below us. It'll be fine. Scriv, so you've got plenty. We briefly said you quite
too
like
much
this
to say.
There's never too much.
Don't say that. Don't encourage me. Okay.
Where would you start, and how do you think, and how do people's like factions and culture affects the games that you run or play in?
So the cultures definitely impact the games, from the NPCs to the surrounding environments, the situations, interactions, and the characters themselves. So I will say, I guess I cheat a little bit because professionally, outside of the TTRPG Turpic world, I am a cultural psychologist. So this is something that I think about a lot on a day-to-day basis. And then I just sort of let that fuel a lot of my writing and world building. So within Iastera, I try to look at cultures the way that they evolve and manifest in the real world, of course, because art mimics life and vice versa, right? So looking at culture and the idea of culture from kind of a multifaceted lens, looking absolutely at religion and faith systems, but then always asking the question, why? So if, for example, within Iastera, there are 4 different kingdoms. Depending on the timeline, there might only be 3 kingdoms. You have Moner, Tashkil, Ila, and Yokul. So for example, in Moner, people are typically a little bit more grounded in nature, might be a little bit more welcoming of people, very hardworking in that sense of family and all of that. But I always ask, okay, well, why? Why are they like that? Why are the people of Moner potentially a little bit more open and welcoming compared to people of Tashkil, for example? What makes culture and society in Moner more welcoming of arcanists and magic users compared to Tashkil or somewhere else within the world, within the setting? So I look at faith systems, I look at historic events as well. So when you think about how cultures evolve IRL, you're looking at history, you're looking at politics, you're looking at faith, all the stories that gave rise to that civilization. You're also looking at environment, like their actual no kidding surroundings. A culture of fishermen, we'll stick with Moner as an example and throw out some names in Felbray, a tiny fishing village on the rocky western coastline that was totally not inspired by Cornwall at all. In Moner, I freaking love Cornwall. But they would have a very different culture, set of beliefs and practices compared to people who live in the Glenfarren forest, completely landlocked, maybe a lake. there is definitely a lake there, but you have different needs. You have different things that will inspire the mind and inspire the different day-to-day practices.
And the reason you travel, maybe you've traveled to the ocean to see the ocean for the first time, or it can give reason to the actual story of the game.
Absolutely. So you take a culture, you take a community that is exposed to the sea, you're going to have a very different outlook on what's important in life and what you need to be happy and healthy. A lot of cultures close to the sea in Iastera will have this a sort of different connection to nature. There's a beauty, but also a danger to the water.
Definitely.
Think about all the different examples in real life mythology and folklore that warn of monsters in the water.
Yeah.
You have to treat the sea with respect because it bites back. So that has a lasting impact in greetings and food sources. I love food, so food is a big thing with culture. So as I'm continuing to ramble on how I look at culture in general, passage of time, even how different ages are treated.
Time is a big one for me.
Time's a big one.
Yeah.
Elderly, the young, how you treat these different demographics within your culture. Those are all cultural elements. So the way that manifests in Iastera, when we do character building for one of the players, and they start talking about the concept, we'll then work through, okay, well, if that's kind of your approach to magic, or that's your viewpoint on people from outside cultures or travel, any of these different things, we'll start to form ideas and draw connections to, okay, well, that kind of makes sense for this kingdom. What if maybe you are from there? Or maybe you used to be from there and now you've gone elsewhere. So you have that aspect of cultural immersion as well.
So you include the character building side of it in what you're...
Absolutely. And in a lot of ways, because as a GM, as a writer, for TTRPGs in particular, it can be hard to think of everything on your own, which is the beautiful thing of collaborative storytelling. So in a lot of ways, I had these different cultures and festivals and practices and food for these different kingdoms thought up. But once you add players into the equation and their backstories and then other NPCs that they may have a connection to, it just breathes so much more life into it, because now you have an example of a player, of a character who lives in that culture. So in a lot of ways, they help to develop it as we go along.
I had a very similar thing. So I think with Ravis as well, when I started it, I just had this idea and I was running. And through actually Emma's character Tutu, the way she played Tutu has influenced the way I think the people from that area are.
Yeah.
And we ended up coming up with a link between the races almost, where Arakocra, because of the age Turtles live and the age Arakocras live, they've almost ended up taking over parts of each other's societal roles almost. So the Arakocra look after turtle children, because turtles tend to die 1 year after they give birth, and train them. So we've decided that some of the traits that Tutu is actually showing are Arakocra village traits,
very cool.
not turtle traits.
And actually, it was weird because, and I think I said this on the last session, I didn't come at Tutu with a whole written 30-page backstory. I came with very minimal, but really, really minimal. Like, something happened. She's this old. She has, her parents are dead. She's traveling. That was pretty much it. You could have probably written it in one paragraph. And we've been playing for a year, and I suddenly thought I should probably have a more full backstory than that. I should probably make an effort and actually write something down. And it was actually then thinking about how she is and how I play her. And then, well, why is she like that? And tying in, we knew that, she's been born on this beach, that her parents died when she was born.
Is the key.
Why?
Ask why to everything.
Yeah. And the fact that she grew up with Arakocra, so what did she learn from them? How did they live? How is that different from how other turtles would have behaved? So all of that fed into the backstory that Liam now has to play with.
Beautiful.
So yeah, it was good, and it was something I wouldn't have thought at the beginning. I'm not as experienced as the other guys in TTRPG generally, or in role playing. So it's been a bit of a journey for me to learn that myself as a player.
It's been
as
a
well.
great journey though.
Mm.
Watching Tutu grow and the excitement to come on it. I was so excited for Tutu.
He's plotting. He's plotting.
I'm excited for I get so hyped with my player's story that I forget about the main story.
One of my favorite things at this stage, especially since it's become more character driven than plot driven for our campaign, I love just sitting
Sitting
back and letting them work their magic, because that's where the magic is.
Yeah.
I just drop some breadcrumbs here and there and do some pretty descriptions.
Definitely.
But it just it breathes so much more life into things.
So just before I just move on to Emma. So obviously one of the main things for you, and just very clearly saying, is why do these things happen? And you also you've looked quite a lot at kind of things in real life, history, and do you say so when you first, so you've got your blank bit of paper in front of you?
Yeah.
Do you kind of in your head go, right, okay, I want to have 3 or 4 kingdoms? Do you start with that kind of concept of I want this, and then add bits to each until they start forming, or do you know it immediately?
Definitely don't know it immediately, because a lot of times the writing sort of develops on its own. So I developed the idea for Iastera back when I first started GMing years ago, because it was the very, very fledgling, very basic setting for my first one shot. And then I went into like darn near forever GM mode. So I just kept developing it and kept exploring it, because why recreate a world that I've already started building?
Yeah.
But it started off with a story hook, a plot hook of trouble in this small little farming village, and people were falling asleep and they thought it was an illness. They didn't know what it was. Everyone was freaking, that kind of thing, which ended up being one of the games I developed later on for D&D for kids. But as I kept digging into it and I kept thinking about the world, I was thinking, okay, why are people afraid of magic? Why is this as big of a deal as it is? Okay. How does magic work in Iastera?
I think definitely the playing of the game as well. The playing of the game allows you to ask questions, because sometimes there'll be something going on and I'll react how I gut feeling think that NPC reacts. And I've not thought about it prior, I just react to it. And then afterwards I get to go, okay, so there's a reason these guys are freaking out about this thing. And like, because I'm just running through their stories constantly in my head, and then we play it out and I get to see how you guys interact with it. I then get to make sensible decisions about how that culture is changing. Like with the slums blaming you guys for the attack, even though it was a criminal that did it. You're the official people. You caused the trouble. You stirred up the pot.
Yeah.
And in a lot of the cultures, you see that where they're blaming the authority rather than the direct person who caused the problem.
Where does that conflict with an authority come from? A lot of Iastera came from me sitting there with my writing journal and a glass of whiskey and just saying, okay, but why though?
Yeah.
But why though? What happened in history that leads to a big historical event that happens in real life as well? You come up with a big war, right? Every culture has some sort of story of a fight, a struggle, a war. Whether that's in the mundane mortal plane or gods warring with each other, all of that. So, okay, conflict creates struggle, which creates eventual recovery and lasting scars.
Yeah.
How does that continue to manifest? And then looking at different kingdoms as well, because I wanted to do some political stuff too. That's fun. How did that event, which isn't the only historic event, but how did that, in recent memory, most cataclysmic event that people will have a memory of, affect the different places differently? Because there's always more than 2 sides to a story. There are multiple sides to a story.
And another bunch of people watching it and reacting just based off what they see from the outside.
Yeah, some kingdoms are going to try to stay neutral.
Yeah.
What is required to push them out of that neutrality, and what are the consequences of that? Always ask why and think about consequences to things. If this, then what?
Yeah.
That's such good advice.
Really.
It's worked for me with my writing journal and my whiskey. So
I think I just ask those questions in life in general, and I'm just I still don't get anywhere.
Yeah, let's turn my anxiety brain into a creative
I was just thinking that.
engine.
I spin myself out asking why about real life stuff.
Oh,
so
yeah,
just do it about your own world where
Absolutely.
you are God and you get to decide.
Just
It's
before
much
we
more
get-
cathartic that way.
It is.
You can
just
control
before we
it.
go off too much just off the main topic. here,
Mental
guys,
health now.
Look after yourself. Go back to the point, Gemma. So, what kind of? How do you see things? So, when you're creating, you said yourself, say you don't have as much experience as some of the people you play with. So, coming through as maybe a bit of a fresher person to it, what steps do you take to build your culture, and how does it kind of evolve?
Yeah, I'm quite relieved actually, because a lot of what I've been hearing is not so far away from my approach. I was a little bit worried that I was just like doing it all wrong.
Don't undermine yourself.
You can never do it wrong.
No,
There is
that's
no
true.
right or wrong.
I can disagree.
Chris can do it wrong. Yeah.
Not when you're wearing that Hawaiian t-shirt.
True. You're going to be his favorite person ever now. That's
He is, completely.
So, I mean, the world that I did start building, and the maps are behind me. I did put some culture in there, but actually the culture came from the historic events. So I started off with my map. I built the map based on things that had happened. So I start with all my mountains and everything, but then why is that area a wasteland? What happened there to make that a wasteland? That event then meant the people living there had nowhere to live. They had no food. What happened to those people? Well, they're going to invade the place next door and take their stuff. How does that impact people? And being slightly analytical and a little bit over logical at times, I actually mapped out about 1,000 years of history in a high level, but sort of worked out what would have happened. You know, these people have started to spread. They've
So impressive.
I'm weird like that. They've made alliances. In the world that I built, Cortovar, there was like an invasion from what we'd call the Abyss in D&D. They drafted in all the wizards and the magic users to try and fix that. And they did, but it also had this cataclysmic effect on the surroundings, that area. So the people who'd seen that and viewed that, they were relieved, but they blamed the magic users for having no food, for killing all the plants and the animals, for making their home unlivable. Those people went on to create an empire. They were quite militaristic anyway, and they then sort of spread and went into the surrounding areas because they would die otherwise. So sort of mapping out how the empire took over and saying, well, first of all, it was full-scale war. Later on, there's sort of political alliances, and they sort of subsume other parts of the world into their empire. You know, they'll marry the daughter off, or they'll do some kind of an alliance, or a prince dies suspiciously perhaps, and oh look, there's nobody on that throne. We'll help you out and we'll take over. So I ended up with, from sort of north to south almost, because that's how it had spread, we had very, very strict, authoritarian, militaristic rule. But then as they'd spread south, each one of those places has been in the empire less time. And so the very lowest area, which is sort of the middle of Cortovar, they've only been part of the empire maybe 50 years. They're not very happy about being part of the empire. They've got their own traditions. And then even further south than that is an area that's managed to stay fairly neutral. So you've now got all the magic users living on the south coast in this area where sort of anything goes. And the further north you go, the more likely you are to get thrown in jail for being an active magic user. So I sort of tried to use that historic thing to shape the culture and how people behave. But
Love that.
it was mainly around magic. I was thinking, what if they don't like magic? How are we going to cope with this? I think the other thing, though, and it's something I'm going to go real life now, sort of back into politics a little bit. And for me, one of the biggest things I've noticed over the last few years, just in the real world, is the impact that poverty can have. So when times are really hard, people start to look inwards more than outwards. They tend to be less likely to be charitable. Governments start to become more right-wing and more sort of insular. It all becomes very patriotic, and we have to look after number one. And I know sort of 5-6 years ago, I was seeing comparisons between now and the 1930s. So the idea that, you know, after the First World War, a lot of countries were very, very poor. They didn't have an awful lot. There was a lot of those situations that directly led to the Second World War, just because people then rebel. And things like, you know, the UK and Brexit, and I know I'm getting political now, but
I was about to say, let's not go too far down this road.
I know, and I'm not going to say, and I'm not going to say which side I
though.
support.
Yeah.
Regardless of which side you support on that, and I'm not going to say which one, the run up to that was very much about people have had a hard time. We've had, you know, the crash in 2008. People haven't got any money. In the UK, we've had austerity for a long, long time. Services being cut left, right, and centre. So people start to be less forgiving, less charitable, less welcoming. And so I try to take that into consideration as well. If you live in a place where there's not a lot of food or there's not a lot of money, how does the government of that place keep control of their people? Do they become stricter because, you know, they've maybe got more people stealing to survive? Does it mean that people are less welcoming because they've not got enough for themselves, never mind some stranger that turns up on the doorstep? So I try to take those kinds of things into consideration as well. Just, you know, if you've got a rich place, they can almost afford to say, yeah, come on in, we'll feed you, we'll put you up. So that was one of the things I brought in.
I really like that way of doing things. Just say, just for the start, especially for the start of saying, okay, I've built a map here, and also I've got a map here, and it's just being like, right, okay, I'm going to say this part is a wasteland, like you said, or this part is an abandoned castle or something, and then you go with, but why is it abandoned? Why is that? And then going back to Scriv's why, what, if, how, and all the other.
It's a nice combination. And I think the same what Scriv was saying earlier, that it's a lot to come up all on your own. But actually, if you pick one historic event, one big thing, and just run down, maybe you don't want to write 1,000 years of timelines out all at once, but if you do it, man. Like, you could write that out, and you'll see culture starting to create itself almost within your timeline of events.
Not just that, it's just say, as you mentioned, you've also looked at, again, you've compared to real life, as I think, say, what we all take from is, say, our own experiences, but you also kind of go with, okay, right, you've looked quite strongly at, say, political and personal, like between each, like, it doesn't matter of, say, if they're magic or not, it doesn't matter if, say, even if they're different races or not, it's very much just, no, I need to protect me because this thing has happened, and that kind of grows in a larger scale. So
in my world, it did actually make some of the races also become more insular, and not so much xenophobic, but very much, you know, we're going to look after ourselves. So the elves were blamed for a lot of what had happened. The elves have gone and locked themselves away and disappeared. So there are half elves in the world, but nobody's seen an elf for a very long time. The dwarven kingdoms were very, very close to where all of this happened. They have locked down. They have, you know, they're still trading with people, they're still communicating and trading, but they're very much, we are this race, this is our culture, this is who we are, we'll deal with you at an arm's length. We're not going to let you come and take over and make us part of the empire. You humans can sort of stay over there and do your thing. So yeah, it was like, how would that impact, you know, people it's a terrible thing to say. I think human nature says that, you know, you tend to stick with the people who are like you, whether that's looks or the games that you play or the music that you listen to. Like, people like to be in tribes, don't they? Like,
it's survival. It's survival instinct. That goes way, way back. If you look into like evolutionary psychology as well, we gravitate naturally towards like people, like communities, because when you feel that kinship, you know, okay, if I am in this community, if I'm in this tribe, they're more likely to look out for me because we have that shared similarity, that likeness, that safety, than if I were going to be somewhere where I stand out. That's like an instinctual kind of thing, which I'll say I can use to excuse my introversion, but it's healthy to expand from that, of course. But I think it makes perfect sense what you've done with that, and I like that idea as you know, you said before, having that event, having that cataclysmic event, and then going from there. Obviously, there are going to be events throughout history, but so many of them may have then faded in current shared collective memory, because let's be honest, when you have the timeline life expectancy of a human in these fantasy worlds, you're going to have a fairly short memory.
And how news travels as well in these times.
Information flow. Oh man, that's a whole nother aspect of culture.
I've been getting into that with Ravis, because we're just getting to a point where magic's so accessible that, you know, they came across just a villager that had like flying paper note messages. And that completely changes the idea of, oh, we're in trouble now. That village isn't as threatened by small bandit groups because they can get messages to places quickly. They're not as isolated.
Absolutely.
I think this topic is one that I could just pull on for hours. Like, I love this.
Think about the advent of the internet and, you know, the globalization of communication that happened again, IRL. What happens when you're able to talk to someone in a different place with a message or a scrying or flying magical paper airplanes with notes written on them?
And the good and the bad of that.
The good and the bad. Absolutely. That changes things so much. And again, parallels with the real world. I think there's a reason why a lot of these different elements take or manifest in fiction writing. Whether fantasy, science fiction, whatever it may be, speculative history, because the writers live in the real world. We all live in the real world. So fiction is your chance to further explore. I try not to as much as possible. But, you know, every now and then.
They'd never allow me to wear this shirt outside if I was in the real world.
Everything's created through the lens of what we perceive ourselves and what we experience ourselves.
And the thing I love about fiction, and nuances between fantasy and sci-fi, of course, but it allows you to, again, ask why, but either delve into some of the things that you see that are concerning, or think, well, what if things were different? So there is an exploration in fiction, but there's also a hope, like a hopeful element to fiction. So these horrible things happened. And then if you apply that to your world building in D&D or a different type of system, you can then ask, well, what if someone did something about it?
Exactly.
There's something so inherently hopeful and inspiring about that.
And the best fantasy novels, right, are the ones where there is somebody who saves the day. I mean, they might go through 6 novels worth of hell before that happens. You know, forget Game of Thrones. But I mean, I remember the Robert Jordan book. Number 13, I think I got it. And it was like, surely they're going to finish it now. No, there's another one. It's like, well,
please let it end.
But we were hanging
it's heartbreaking. Absolutely, that's such good. Oh, I'm so happy you brought it up. There are some issues within Robert Jordan, but
we'll forget those.
Storytelling is good. So if you're going through a hard time out there, you're not even halfway through your book series yet. You know? Keep going. It might take 13 books of hell, but you'll get there. Hero.
There you go. There's some inspiration for life, I guess.
It's your bardic inspiration,
you're
friends.
having a crap time. It's not even halfway through yet. But you get there. That's the way.
That doesn't work. We'll workshop it.
Bring it all back. Say I'm a little bit aware of the time. So
Time is
Really, I think saying
a construct.
yeah, we've got here that clearly
constructs of time.
So
clearly we've got quite a lot of things
Mm.
that you can look at, and we can talk about this for good hours. I can easily see that.
Yeah.
And there's just so much going on. But for any budding DMs who literally just kind of go, right, where do we start? A few kind of pointers that I've probably like that you may have seen would have been, you can start a little bit small, say like how Liam just started with religion and how it kind of moved on as he let the players kind of mold it a bit, and then he kind of carried on. You can see how Emma uses the geography of places, and also then looking at historical events and plotting that timeline to whatever length you wish to decide to. And then obviously we have then Scriv here, who is just the fountain of knowledge of anything culture.
Oh God.
Like, and any like looking from anything, as we've said, from messages to the internet to so many things that Stacey said that I can't even begin to repeat. But
That's a sign that I've rambled.
no,
I got it all.
It was all good.
I got it all.
Really good
stuff.
Bless
And-
him.
I'll ramble.
and the main thing I think is very much is just to think of why, how,
Yes.
when, what, like all these kind of, think of that when you're building either just one city, one country, multiple cities, kingdoms, whatever. If you do that and then work it, how these people may interact with others, whether it's village to village, town to town, cities, wars, just always think why, how, and that will really help you hopefully build a great campaign, a great story, which you can adapt with your players. You can include your plays in. That was actually one of my favorite things when you, Scriv, said about you create when character creation. You've already gone right. Okay, because your character has these kind of views, they would probably suit these types of areas. They could be elsewhere, but this is probably a good fitting place for them to have been, grown up, or left, or something like that. Which just again includes everybody. Then it gets everybody into that game. Now I think that's pretty much all the time. So we've got this session.
Not enough.
I would love to have this session a bit more and go on, do another one, maybe discuss a few other pointers that I'm sure we haven't even touched.
If people have questions, I'm sure Scriv will come back to answer
Yeah.
some
We
more.
can do another session.
This has
We won't
been
let her leave.
like so much fun, and I'd love to come back if you guys can tolerate me again.
Oh,
Yeah.
We would absolutely love to have you. And for anyone who does want to follow her or see what she's up to, Scriv, do you want to do a quick couple of things about yourself again? Or where to find you?
Absolutely. So, hello again. This is Scriv the Bard, cultural psychologist by day-ish, and game designer for TTRPGs every other waking hour of the day, which usually is probably a little bit more than I should be awake. You can find me on Twitter at Scriv the Bard or also at Bard Commune. I've got a website because of all the other projects I've been working on with the streamed campaign and then Bard Commune and other things. I haven't posted new articles for a while, but scrivthebard.com, I actually have, and I looked it up before this stream, I have like 3 or 4 articles on there that I wrote specifically digging into culture in your RPG.
Definitely
So
go
Check it
out.
out. Just put it in the search bar, culture, you'll find them. But yeah, I'm on Twitch as well, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with the occasional random other day, depending on how I feel.
And your Patreon. Don't forget your Patreon.
Yes, I have a Patreon, and I put out monthly goodies, whether it's a magic item page or a one-shot, an NPC, different things, a lot of which have been inspired by the world of Eyster and the campaign that we're exploring. So yeah, there's that. Hello.
That sounds absolutely amazing. I'm probably going to be subscribing to a couple of those things. I
Oh
think
my
of myself.
Thank you.
And guys, where can they find you? Starting with Leah.
You can find me on Twitter at thatguywrites. I also handle the @1in20TTG.
And
And my Twitter handle is @RowanFirefish. and pretty much everything's on there that you could ever want to know. So yeah, you can see sort of the art that I do for the Ravis stream as well in there.
Yes.
And you can find me at Scholar Chris. You can find us all at, as Liam said, say at 1 in 20 TTG. If you liked this video, if you thought it was helpful, even if you didn't, we would still appreciate the subscribe. I'm sure saying like, so I hope that you found this entertaining. We love you all, really appreciate it all. And if that's all, if there's anything else to do, roll well.
Round of applause for our host who herded those cats like a professional. Because we went a little nuts there.
No, that was good. That was
that was
good session.
Thank you. And everyone, roll well.
Roll well.
Bye.
Bye.
So happy?
Yeah.
That just put me off there.
Sorry. I'm done.
Ignore it.
Silence on.
It's fine.